Today is March 16th, 2023. If you've been watching it, if you're a subscriber, then you've noticed I haven't posted anything in a long while, largely because I haven't had anything to say. We haven't really gone anywhere. There hasn't really been any changes in anything, no news to update, no real opinions to share here. I've been doing stuff on the Does a Bear channel. In fact, just today, yesterday, whatever, I finally released something that was on my channel, but which I shot and shared with patrons of Does a Bear over a month ago. And even that was largely done for the benefit of one person, a person that I've been helping creatively, and he's been helping me creatively, and more so him helping me creatively than me helping him, but that's, another issue. But anyway, yeah, the reason why I thought, now I'm going to post something. I have something to talk about. And the thing I have to talk about is the fact that it was 3 years ago yesterday that, at least where I was, everybody was sent home to work from home. It was the first of the lockdowns for COVID. I became the only person working in the office. And that was 3 years ago. And it's hard for me to wrap my mind around the fact that this has only been 3 years. It seems like a lot longer. It seems like it was 5 years ago the pandemic began. Ontario had a month-long shutdown that ended up going a bit longer than that, because under a normal virus kind of thing, if you stop the spread, then in about 28 days, you're free of it. You're clear of it. Of course, this wasn't a normal virus. And for tons of reasons, most of which have to do with the people who just simply can't follow basic health rules, the whole thing dragged on. And then goofy political decisions that were made contrary to health advice, health experts' advice, we kept reopening. And we kept reopening at the worst times. And so the spread kept happening. New waves were occurring, and it was just this ridiculous, prolonged thing where now we're at the point where everybody has either had the vaccines or had the virus. Now, the people that have had the virus are still prone to having it again, could have had it real bad. The people that have had the vaccines, when they have it, are having very mild versions of it. Tiny percentage are having reactions to the vaccines, which again is normal. It's still much less than annually have problems with birth control or even flying. But of course, everybody who doesn't like what we went through is going to overemphasize the severity of any complication, because that's what people do when they're selfish. But here we are 3 years into this. And of course, if somebody had come to me 3 years ago and said, 3 years from now, you're going to be living in Edmonton, I would have said, what? Are you out of your mind? I think I actually did say that to somebody, because there is no circumstance where this doesn't seem like an extreme decision. This is the middle of March. I can pretty much guarantee you the ground in Mississauga right now is not covered in 4.5 months of snow accumulation. And not pretty well guarantee you, I can guarantee you it's not. The first snowfall fell in November 1, overnight. And the ground has looked pretty much like this since, although, more footsteps on it now. But I think the reason why that has triggered this posting is because before moving to Edmonton and working remotely, I was still going into the office. I worked for an essential industry. It was back-end support for it, but I had letters from the CFO that I was ready with me to give to the police, proving to them that I was essential and had to be out there even during the lockdowns. I had the office all to myself for the longest time, and even when the lockdowns ended, there was only a few people, like a couple, that ever came in on any regularity. And it wasn't until, I want to say last May, that more started showing up. But now that I'm working remotely, I'm experiencing what everybody else did 3 years ago. Generally a loner, so it's really not that big of a deal. I do miss the commute, though. I really do. I miss that quiet time where there was nothing to do but think between home and work, and then work and home. I miss that part. And I could go out and take a drive after work every day. I could take a drive before work every day, but it seems kind of pointless when my desk is 20 feet from the bed. and I'm finishing earlier with an hour lunch, whereas to finish at the time that I'm finishing now, I had to start almost at the same time and then either skip lunch or take a really shortened version of it. But this is quite, I think there are a lot of people that ended up in a much different situation than they were at March 14th, 2020. Maybe not as dramatic as what I've got, but I think there's a lot. I think it was a game changer. I think it was a pivot point. And only history is going to be able to figure out what the full ramifications of it were. The 1918 pandemic was interesting because governments did not respond at all to the needs of the people during that pandemic. They just basically said, you can't do this, you can't do that, and figure it out. And if you don't, we'll just fine you and put you in jail. And that was all constitutional. 100 years later, and governments learned from that. And what they learned from the 1918 pandemic, the lessons that they applied to the 2021, is that what happened afterwards. You see, there was almost zero support for unions before the 1918 pandemic. But workers were treated like crap, abandoned, and hardship was the norm. And then after, difficult. And so what you had was the rise of socialism, because when you left society to the devices of the rich and powerful, they screwed everyone over. And the little trickling uptick of socialism now is nothing compared to the radical seismic sociological change that occurred starting with the 1918 pandemic and continuing, culminating realistically after World War II. That was 30 years of trial, tribulation, transition. That was 30 years of economic collapse and hardship. That was 30 years of strife and starvation. And that was a period where the entire generation of progressives, which is what we call the people who came of age in the 1910s, had to become one of the most mobile generations in history. They all moved for better opportunities. The migration out west happened largely during the 30s. Places like Nevada would still be largely desert and uninhabited if it hadn't been for the public work projects like the Hoover Dam that drew people there and then cities built up around them. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next 30 years. Pushback from the rich and powerful for having to shoulder any of this burden, and the up push from the bottom and the middle as they realize this is an opportunity to take back some of the ground they've lost since Reagan. And that conflict is playing out. And what's interesting is I think right now conservatives are largely better at making it seem like they're on the side of the little guy, even though there's no evidence that they ever have been. They'll throw the religious right a bone every once in a while so they can say, well, we're on your side. But at the end of the day, the wealth transfer is increasing, not decreasing, whenever a conservative's in charge. So you got to deal with that. But anyway, 3 years ago, just thought I'd mention it. Yeah, I just want to say that there are a large number of times where the phrase "greetings from Ice Planet Hoth" comes to my mind. If I ever see a hairy kangaroo romping around, I'll know it.